Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Martinworld Song of Ice and Fire reread. I am your host. I am the Fattest Leech. You can find me across different social media platforms. Actually, just a few. I'm not on a lot. Or you can find me on my blog, thefattestleechoficeandfire.com. And the story that we're going to be discussing today is the first published of George's 3 Corpsehandler series. This one is called Reread. It's part of the Thousand Worlds universe. And like I said, it's part of the Corpsehandler subseries. The story that follows this one is going to be Nobody Leaves New Pittsburgh and then Meat House Man, which is George's best story ever. Don't let anybody tell you differently, and I cannot wait to discuss that story. It's taken me a long time to build up to get to these Corpsehandler stories. So, what is this story all about? What is Reread all about? George likes paralleling his events and his archetypes, and this includes the interactions within his own writing world that go between past and present. My main blog page has many quotes where George straight up says that he reuses characters and names and themes across all of his work. So he's quite taken with this whole like building this large literary universe that's his to play in, and that's perfectly fine with me because it makes doing research like this quite interesting and fun. So this story, Reread, it fits the arc primarily as the Bran, Bloodraven John, essentially Greenseer arc. This is one of his like proto Greenseer type of stories that where he's taken a couple different stories of his and sort of mashed them together to create the fully much more fleshed out, leafed out, if you want to say, concept and character archetype of the Greenseer in A Song of Ice and Fire. Another good story to read for some proto Greenseeing idea development is For a Single Yesterday, and oh gosh, there's the other one. They're all on my book club reread page, and we'll touch on those again as they come up. So this arc primarily fits the Bran Greenseer combination, and specifically the upcoming events against the Ice Dragon Others. If you have your bingo cards ready, there's a bingo for you. There's a bingo check mark for you. The Ice Dragon Others. And well, in dragons in general, dragons in magic in Martinworld, or especially A Song of Ice and Fire, very briefly, it follows the idea of that he has established that we'll just call it magic. That magic comes from one source, and that's the green. And what has happened is there's been a divide. There's been two branches, two seeds even, if you will, that have become the two extremes. There's the red dragon fire extreme, and there's the blue dragon like ice fire extreme. And the details to that will be in another discussion on another video. So just know that it follows like the green, the red, and the blue. And the red and the blue are the two extremes. And do I have any proof for this? Yes, across all of Martinworld, it is there. It's even there in the story. Think of the trident as the most obvious example. The red and the green and the blue, and they all come together. They have a divide. They have a source. They're the same, but they're different. A Song for Laya is another story that exhibits that very explicitly. Closing Time, that's the other story that if you want to read a Green Scene prototype story, Closing Time is another good one. Actually, there's quite a few good ones, even Fever Dream. So, but what does George have to say on this matter? Well, more than a few years ago, a couple of years ago now, George talked to Al Jazeera TV. Excellent interview, by the way. Watch the whole thing if you can find it. It's out there. It's not that rare. Watch the whole thing. But there's this one part in particular where the interviewer is asking George about the theme of dragons in his story and how that associates with the title of the series, A Song of Ice and Fire. And George answers, well, of course, the two outlying ones, the things going on north of the wall, and then there is the Targaryen on the other continent with her dragons. They are, of course, the ice and fire of the title, A Song of Ice and Fire. That they are, meaning the people, that the people are blind to the much greater and more dangerous threats that are happening far away on the periphery of their kingdom. So they're all these people are fighting over the throne, and they're blind to these two incoming dragons. Dragon elements, this extreme blue dragon, this extreme red dragon, and those are what they should be paying attention to, but they are not. And he somewhat likens it to current geopolitical situations and globally. So he goes on to say, but people are using it, meaning the rule, as a political football instead of, you'd think everybody would work together to get this fixed. This is something that can wipe out possibly the human race. So I wanted to do an analog, not specifically to the modern day thing, but as a general thing with the structure of the book. So you can find this quote and all of these quotes, plus a ton more notes on my blog page for the Override Reread, if you want the sources to them. So what is Override about? Well, we talked about the split and the magic. Override is a betrayal between brothers. We are introduced to the rather well-adjusted pacifist man, the main character named Matt Kabaraijian. He is eventually sold out by his coworker / brother, not by blood, but I guess you can even say like a milk brother. He's sold out to send what is a usurping company that's coming in, headed up by a guy named Bartling, and that has to do with the corporeal pear. We'll get to that in a minute. So this story is a blood betrayal in A Song of Ice and Fire terms. The two work as corpse handlers on the planet Grotto, and they mine for swirl stones, which is a very desirable stone used throughout the Thousand Worlds universe. We don't actually, when you read all of the Thousand Worlds stories, we don't actually hear swirl stones coming up hardly ever. It's something that was developed for and mainly used in this story. It's a plot device that drives the ambition. All is good on Grotto until a new corporation moves in on the workforce. Like I said, this is the usurping Bartling Associates. That is the Great Other, the head dragon that controls these small folk, I guess you can say. So in order to save his own life, Kabaraijian has to learn to open his third eye and be able to see and handle the dead workermen to mentally override a system that was sent out via a cat's paw assassin. So, I mean, again, this is where George got the idea that there was going to be an assassin sent after Bran. It's something he's been working on for years. Whatever happened to John at the end of A Dance with Dragons, I know everybody, or a large portion of the fandom, likes to think that what happened to John was because of the free folk, was because of this, was because of that. I wouldn't hold my breath too long on those basic ideas, because this is more of an assassin situation with what happened to John. But even through this, like I said, Kabaraijian, he's actually George's probably most well-adjusted character. He's not really an extreme of anything. He's very laid back. And all is good until his friend Ed, who essentially is working as a fiery hand. Think of like Melisandre. She's an agent of the fire god. Whatever happened to whoever sent the cat's paw to Bran, that was an agent of a fire god, whether blue fire or green fire or red fire. That was an agent of the extreme. Same with John. Whatever happened to John, it was an agent of the extreme. So, yeah. Kabaraijian, he always chooses the non-violent option first. With the death that happens at the end of this story, it's pretty much an unavoidable I don't want to say accident. Accident might be too strong of a word, but it's an unavoidable situation where he has to make an extremely tough decision in the end to save his own life, but it also saves the lives of pretty much everybody on the planet. And when you read the story, you'll see why. So it's this recurring in-world dispute of brother versus brother didn't start with the Song of Ice and Fire, but rather decades earlier in stories like this one, like Fever Dream, and in plenty of other stories where there's a blood betrayal for money or notoriety or promotion, etc. like that. It's some sort of power. And George has taken this from the biblical tale of Cain and Abel, which the moral tale of that story there can really be compressed down into what is essentially the fall of man. And this is the main reason why Bran has to play Lord of the Crossing with the phrase. It's preparation for when Bran has to defend the, air quote, waters, the greens, whether it's through green seeing or physically, literally, he has to defend the waters via mind battle with the ice dragon others who are first, and then as they cross the wall is that sea, that boundary. And then as Dany crosses the narrow sea, probably either at the extreme very end of A Dream or The Winds of Winter or the beginning of A Dream of Spring. It's when Dany's coming over. That's when her crossing is. So this is playing Lord of the Crossing in green seeing sense was prepping Bran, which is going to benefit Jon in the future for the crossing of these dragon elements. And this again has to do with how magic is split in A Song of Ice and Fire. How superficially readers assume that all magic or all intent is the same or it all functions the same, but it's very fundamentally different. And this divide creates those two extreme dragon elements. But again, that's a topic for another post. So on my blog page, I have a couple of links to some other essays that I've written, such as Green Seeing Means Enlightenment or Enlightenment. Let me go back and pronounce that properly. And then discussions on the corporeal pear. I have links to Nobody Leaves New Pittsburgh. That's going to be the next Corpsehandler story that I'm going to discuss after this one. And I have links to the 93 outline and then another essay about Samuel teaching true speech. These are all important. You don't have to read them, but they're all important if you are the type of person that wants that extra information, because I have all of the book and George quotes and stuff pulled together there. But you'll hear me mention them a few times in this video. So, written in 1972, it was first published in Analog. This is a first edition copy of it, of the story. Mine is in great shape-ish, sort of. My spine's a little bit cracked and broken, but I have this picture and any other artwork from this story on my blog page if you're somebody like me that like nerds out on artwork. If you don't have that original first edition copy, this story, Reread, was released a few years ago in the New Night Flyers and Other Stories anthology. It's in there with a couple of other stories. So this, you can get the text in print if you want still. It's available. It's there. But it's on my blog, so you can get it right away, like instantly if you want to, for a reread. So one of the first shared themes among the 3 Corpsehandler stories is the location and occupations of the main characters. It's all very Valeria-like, with mining, or rather over-mining, and volcanic locations, lots of mountains and volcanic locations, and even using the different types of tools or weaponry they use, like lots of nuclear energy, which George has said the dragons are the nuclear deterrent. So it goes along with dragon stuff. Even in Night Flyers, even the Night Flyer ship is described like that. The overmining, this is shown directly in the repeating theme or repeating motif, like work you to death and beyond, production of powerful extreme dragon elements. In short, this is slavery of a different face. We'll do a video on slavery, but just know right now that George is not writing, and he has said this, he's not writing a modern day equivalent to what the United States has in its history. This is not even what Danny is doing. She's not like freeing the slaves the way Abraham Lincoln did. And in that slavery in George's world is, again, it's like split. It's not just one thing. It's like magic. It's not just one thing. You have mental slavery or you have bodily slavery. And the 2 different dragons in Ice and Fire, they both use mental slavery to take control bodily of their slaves or their fighters. And then, and another theme that George has in this story, Reread, is the corporeal pear. And I have a little diagram on my blog page if you want to take a look at it. The corporeal pear idea is used in all 3 of the Corpsehandler stories, but also some unofficial Corpsehandler stories like Night Flyers and Sand Kings, which I have both of them transcribed and videoed on my blog page, my reread page, if you want to take a look. So, however, it's not the handler that is the bad guy, but rather the corporation that is in control. Believe it or not, George doesn't really write corpse handling as being a negative thing in and of itself. It's actually more like the green element in magic. What makes it bad is when you break it off into the extremes, when you break it off into the red dragon element or the blue dragon element. That's when it becomes the bad guy. That's when you start to have in story, it starts to develop a great other. This mass production is what we see in both Ice and Fire, with ice dragons, like with Craster, or even with the Targaryen incest, or even Krasny's. Krasny's is the Essos version of Craster. Even their names are different versions of the same thing. And both of them essentially produce warriors for the dragon to take to use for war. The upcoming war. Same with the dragon Targaryen, the incest. The incest is not just because Egyptians did it and George thought it was interesting to use in his story. No, Targaryen incest is much different than that. And I have a page on it, and I have a link on the Override reread if you want to take a look at that. But through all of this, and I can't stress this enough, is Matt Kabaraijian is George's most well-adjusted protagonist, and he's a working corpse handler, which means he is a living person that has that uses dead people, not dead through anything that he did. He did not murder anybody for these. These are just people that died, and the corpse handlers are using them for some purpose that living humans can't do. That's explained very well in all three of the corpse handler stories. And this is important to keep in mind for Bran and Hodor, in the situation we're going to see between the two in the Winds of Winter. I have a feeling Bran is going to have to corpse handle Hodor to get himself back to the wall, to get him back to Castle Black. And it's essentially going to be, something's going to happen to Hodor. We know it's going to be some sort of like mental invasion. And if Hodor dies, there's a very high chance that Bran is going to have to use Hodor to get himself back to the wall. And there is a very good example of this later in the story Override, where Matt is saying that he was looking at himself through the eyes of a corpse. And there's some actual physical handling going on as well. And we're already teased with this a little bit when Bran is about to enter Bloodraven's cave. It was a slip, wasn't it? Where Bran's about to enter Bloodraven's cave, and Bran is looking back. He goes into Hodor, and he's looking back at his own dead body laying there. Not dead, but it's seemingly dead body laying in the snow, and he asks, what happens if I die? What happens to my body if I die? So George has already teased this in the story. So the corporeal pear element, that we can even see that in the Song of Ice and Fire with Dany on top of her pyramid. She has a pear tree. Viserion is often in the pear tree. Somebody she calls lazy when he's up there. And then there's Daario, a character taken from his Proto-Daenerys story, The Glass Flower. Daario eats the pear that Dany gives to him. So she offers this almost, I guess you could almost say that it's like the biblical apple or pomegranate between Adam and Eve. She's up in her garden on top of a pyramid. When she's up there, she asks herself, is this what a god feels like? And also with Daario, he's Tyroshi, and his heritage, they're known for their pear brandy. So, and Danny is representing that governmental overreach. So, which is essentially what the dragons are. They're a corporate overreach or a governmental overreach, but really those two go hand in hand. Not just in George's stories, but in real life as well. So what's in a name? George gives a lot of thought to the names of the characters, names of the places, the planets, the cities that he uses. The main protagonist is Matt Kabaraijian. His surname is not something that I'm finding in real life. And the closest I can find to that, which actually aligns perfectly with the whole green seeing element in Martinworld, is based on a philosophy rather than a familial name, like a family name. And it's the Kabaraijian philosophy. I am hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. Kabaraijian philosophy, which is considered, for those who follow it, it's a complete guide to life, a blueprint to the human existence and consciousness. If you read Night Flyers, there's between two of the characters, they have a discussion of what life means, like what is it to be alive, and one of the first and main things that they mention is consciousness. You have to be self-aware and have a consciousness, which is not that hard of a concept to understand. And then we have the reluctant antagonist, Ed Cochran, and he really is a reluctant antagonist. He loves his brother, his milk brother, I guess you could say. He loves Matt, but he's falling into temptation. Again, somewhat like Melisandre does. Which both of them, as much love as they do have, they still think that what they are doing is for the bigger, greater good, and it's really not. The name Cochran has a few spelling variants, and they're all like Scottish Gaelic or Irish Gaelic, meaning either red brook or crimson. It has to do with the red. So again, back to that George color scheme magic and division between the red and the blue with the green in the middle. We have Ed Cochran, whose name means red brook. You can say bloody water or crimson. And even Egret describes the wall as a river of blood between the southern part and the true north. She describes it as a river of blood. In Fever Dream, the river that they're on, the Fever Dream River, at one point, one of the protagonists describes it as a river of blood. So again, common theme and motif across Martinworld. So in Override, as in George's story, the pear-shaped man, Lowell Bartling from Override, he's the main villain. And he's literally pear-shaped. He's literally a corporeal pear. The name Bartling is derived from two sources. Bartlett, as in pear, and Bertwald, which means bright or bright rule. That brings us to, this is going to seem weird, but it's there, Aryan Brightfire, which is also found very explicitly in the Daenerys prototype Cyrene from the story The Glass Flower. And there was a recent video chat on that I'll link to where Ran says, or Elio, depending on how you know him, saying that from what he knows of the story, we should be paying more attention to Aryan. And that was just like a week or so before I created all of this. So I'm excited to add that information and share it with you guys. Then we have a minor character. His name is Munson. This is a name that George will later reuse in his partially written 2001 story called Black and White and Red All Over. The name Munson was brought to England in the Great Wave of Migration following the Norman conquest of 1066. That's about the most information I can find on it that has any possible to do with anything. The story Black and White and Red All Over, that's a joke, though, about newspapers. And that is why there's a Bloodraven character in there. His name is even... I forget what his first name is, but his last name is Blackwood, and he works for a newspaper, and that's why that's essentially what the Weirwoods and Bloodraven represent with the Ravens. It's a journalistic, historic preservation of information. And black and white and red all over. Those are the colors of Bloodraven's Blackwood sigil. Bloodraven was created before this whole Blackwood background was. So all of this family and background, that's new information, basically retrofitted to fit Bloodraven. But that's a different topic in general. And this story takes place on the planet Grotto. The etymology of the word means picturesque cavern or a cave, probably from Dante's Divine Comedy, also meaning something like hidden place or crypt. And there are quite a few variations on the out there in the fandom that something big is going to have to happen in the Winterfell crypts, and I totally agree with that. There is something. What is going to happen, I'm not sure, but something is going to happen with the crypts. And as far as the Dante's Comedy Association, not just as one of the levels of hell in general. I have more notes on my page if you want to read more, but George is also bringing that in with the phrase seven hells. Like when somebody says, uses seven hells as like a swear word, you know. Eddard Stark had no taste for these intrigues. 7 hells, he swore. So the biggest theme in here is the green seer, the green seeing. We've talked a little bit about this before, but fly or die means you need to learn to green see, or you're going to die. And not just green see, but you have to perfect your talent, and you have to be able to override the dragon system. The story starts with there's a standalone phrase where George says the only way to break free of a controlling force is to first recognize exactly what that force is. So you recognize the force. You have this dragon, strong dragon element. That is the force. And then you have to break free of that. The only way to break free of that is to override it. So you have to be smarter than the average bear and your green seeing skills have to be the best of the best. That's why there's only one lead or head green seer at a time. Other people might have like twinges of the talent, but they don't have it quite to this level. And having a talent like that and having it in degrees is something that George most definitely does across his stories like Night Flyers, Song for Laya, and a few others. Again, not all of it is the same. So the different sections of the story, I went ahead and I broke it down into 12 different sections. So if you want to read it from my page and you have to come back to read it, if you only have like a few minutes at a time, I broke it down into 12 sections. It's not a terribly long story. But the 12 sections, well, it starts how A Song of Ice and Fire starts. It starts with Kabaraijian returning from his boat with his Corpsehandlers. And it says it's essentially how the prologue of the Game of Thrones starts. We should start back. And he's coming back in from the job. And then he goes to a pub, and then from there, the dragon enters. Bartling enters. There are some second thoughts. There's some moral conundrums that we see some of the characters go through. But then it starts with Grotto's morning sun. And this is important, and I chose that title, Grotto's Morning Sun, because John is the sun's son. I know there's a very common, well-written theory that it's Quentin for different reasons, but what Quentin does really isn't worthy of a warning. Quentin essentially, he helps Dany. He releases her dragons so they can grow big and strong. John is the sun's son. So here we have somewhat of a John prototype, and he greets the morning sun. And then there is a birth. And when I say birth, I mean not just B-I-R-T-H, but a B-E-R-T-H. That is a launch, and that is purposeful wordplay that George has used, not just in this story, but with Lysa, and in Fever Dream, and in Night Flyers. It's a launch of a dragon. And then the mining begins. And then the mind battle erupts. So there's also a play on words between mining and minding, like overmining and overminding, which is overriding. And then there's more dead men stalking, and then the Mummer's Farce is revealed. Yes, George has been working on the Mummer's Farce for a long time. And then it ends with the revelation of the Night of the Mind. That is a phrase in A Song of Ice and Fire that has to do with Bran that I love, and I've loved for years. And it has that double meaning. Night of the Mind is what the Maesters, this is what Maester Luwin is telling Bran. This is what the Maesters are. We're the Knights of the Mind. And Bran's like, I don't want to do that. And the irony there is he does become a Knight of the Mind, but it's of the green seeing mind, not necessarily the way that the Maesters think of it. But this goes on to a bigger plot point that George is working towards, is the merging of information between the Maesters and the green seeing element. It's no longer going to be this versus this. This is societal progress. This is part of what flying means. You can learn to fly. That is societal progress. These two things, instead of being at odds with each other, they're going to merge. They're going to reforge, or forge in the first place, to be like a new sword, to be a Knight of the Mind. So that's a running theme, a developing theme in Ice and Fire that I absolutely love, and I cannot wait to see how it plays out. But again, if you go to my blog, I have information linked that you can, if you want some extra reading, you can. Because who doesn't want extra reading right now? What else are we going to do? So we need to sharpen our minds like a sword needs a whetstone, right? And I'm not going to go through every detail, every note on this. And this video is really just to whet your appetite, to get you to read the story yourself and then interact with the rest of us nerds. You can, no matter what time or when in the future you view this video or you read the story from the blog, there are people just waiting in the shadows to jump in with discussion. So we're all going to have slightly different takes on things, which is perfect, which is great. Because what is the truth? What is the truth of the truth? So we're here. I will say that some of the biggest pieces, or the most important pieces of information, is knowing that John is the sun's son, and that green seeing means enlightenment, all linked in there, and that this is that George doesn't write all of his characters, even though he says he likes gray characters. A lot of readers tend to assume, like, unless they are super extreme, like Tywin or Ramsay, but even then, some readers don't think that Tywin or Ramsay are really that bad, but not all gray characters are the same. So even though we have a green element person, Matt Kabaraijian, Bran, Bloodreaven. So even if we have these green characters, if they do something that seems really gross and really icky to us, we readers in this the year 2021, that doesn't mean that is how George sees it. So you have to get rid of your own prejudices when you're reading another author's work. You have to get into their own mind. And there's a few lines in here in Override where Matt is saying that using dead men is essentially using dead men to do the things that living men can't do is smart. And Song of Ice and Fire, with the whole abomination skin changer list that we get, it's an abomination to take a living person and do anything with a living person, like the Unsullied, like whatever we're gonna see the Ice Dragon others do, which is what the Corpsehandlers don't do. They do not take living people and do anything with them. It's only those that are dead. So yeah, there's a lot of things that might seem like really icky and really gross to us. That doesn't matter. We're talking Martinworld here. We're talking George R.R. Martin, and him. That's a pretty strong statement, and this is why Old Nan is telling Bran these scary stories. She's prepping him for all of those stories are just analogies, for him, the situations that he's going to get into, that he's going to have to override, to outsmart, whatever you want to call it, so he can save Westeros, so he can save humanity, essentially. That, back to the Cain and Abel thing. So there's a quote by George that I love, that I bring up every once in a while. He says, "I don't believe in black and white characters. I don't want to write the band of heroes on one side and the orcs on the other side. But that's not to say that the old characters, or all of my characters, are equally gray. Some are very dark gray and some are mostly white, but they still have occasional flaws in them. I've always been fascinated by human beings and all their complexity, and even newbies who do appalling things. The question is why? Why are they doing appalling things? And it's interesting to get inside the head. Ding, ding, ding. It's interesting to get inside the head and see why some of my viewpoint characters have done some of the incredibly reprehensible things that they have done. So again, with what Bran is probably going to have to do with Hodor, he's probably going to have to skin change Hodor to get himself back to Castle Black. Intelligent readers are going to see that as a necessary evil, that is not the same thing as cultivating an army for war. That is not the same thing as skin changing a living human to control them or influence them against their own will. You have to look at what they're doing in that situation and why, for the greater good, why. So if you want any more information, all of the information will be linked. If you're watching this on YouTube, the link to this story and all of the notes are going to be in the the little info right below. Like I said, join in any sort of discussion anywhere that I am online, and I'm always ready to to discuss these stories. I've read all 80 plus of George's available works. I'm constantly rereading them and updating my blog at the same time. So I'm still staying pretty active with this. So if you do want more germ spreading, as I call it, my blog is Fattest Leech of iceandfire.com, I believe. Or I'm on the Twit hole. I was on some other fandom forums for a while. I'm not really there that much anymore. So, but you can still find me online. Oh, on Facebook, I started doing a Facebook thing for the Fattest Leech. Everything is under that same fandom name. So I'm going to do this Corpsehandler story. The next one is going to be Nobody Leaves New Pittsburgh. And then it's going to be Meat House Man. And then we're all going to get together for a live stream to talk about corpse handling in general. And it's going to be awesome because it's one of my favorite subplots of George's. So thank you so much for hanging out this long. If this is your first time watching a video of mine, welcome. I appreciate you being here. And if this is your second, third, or fifth, or 10th time visiting me in video form, thank you for reading the Jambles and Jumbles of the Fattest Leech of Ice and Fire by Gumbo. You guys are awesome, and I appreciate everything that you do. You guys have a great day.